With a global perspective from living and working in three continents, my next speaker, Jason Nutter, is a passionate speculator and a dedicated traveler who immerses himself in diverse cultures and philosophies. He has traveled extensively in East Asia for business, including to China. Jason's keen interest in energy and macroeconomics adds depth to his insights. A close friend of mine and an original resident of Singapore with an Australian dad, a Singaporean mom, and a German wife, now living in Germany. Our close conversations often span the gap between all things East, when the East meets the West. Currently residing in Europe with his German wife and two children, Jason brings, in my view, a very unique blend of experiences and perspective to our discussion on capitalism and the interaction between the East and the West. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Jason Nutter.
Hey Jayant, thanks. What an intro. I hope that I'll be able to share a little bit about the many conversations I've had with Jayant and others like Jayant, right? I grew up in Singapore, in Asia, and I found myself in the West for studies and then after that for work. So the majority of my adult life has been spent in the West, and so maybe that's why Jayant and I share a little bit in common, and we have maybe a unique perspective on how these different societies navigate the challenges that they face, right? So I'm hoping that with the few minutes I have here, I can share a little bit about how Asian societies, or let's say the Singaporean society, looks at ideals such as equality, freedom, democracy, the conceptual view they have of these ideals. Because I would say it's pretty universal that when you talk to anyone from Singapore or from anywhere in Europe or in America, everyone would say, freedom is good, right? Equality is good. Democracy is good. But from my time spent in the West, I've started to notice that maybe we're having these conversations using the same words, but maybe the meanings that we have about these words are different, right? So I just wanted to share my own mental framework so that I don't suffer from too much cognitive dissonance, right, from my time in the West. So I'll give you some examples. Like when I went to Australia to study, I got comments like, "Hey, you're from Singapore. Which part of China is Singapore? Hey, how come you can speak English?" Another good one was, I saw Singapore on TV. It's really clean. That's because you guys are very strict, right? Like you've got rules to throw you in jail if you decide to put your can of soda at the bus stop. And questions like that gave me a lot of pause, because here I was thinking that, hey, I'm not tossing that piece of trash on the floor because I don't feel like I want to toss that piece of trash on the floor. But apparently my friends and family in the West are telling me that it's because the rules are so strict, right? There was also this interaction I had that really threw me off balance was when my wife and I moved to a new apartment in Germany. A neighbor came around to say hi. And we had a nice conversation. He said he was going to go to Southeast Asia for holidays, and I thought I'd be nice and said, "Hey, if you need a list of things to do in Singapore, tell me. I'll be happy to give you a list. Maybe my friends can meet you, maybe you have a good time. And he said, sorry, but it's a personal decision I've made not to visit authoritarian countries where the people are not free. So I was standing there, I was like, okay, poker face. And then, so questions like that make you really question what you thought to be true, right? Like I thought I was free, but this person was telling me that I wasn't, So if you guys don't mind, let me just share what I think the differences are in terms of these different ideals that we all share. And hopefully we can then have better conversations with, when East meets West going forward. So, the first concept I'd like to talk about is equality. So when I first went to Sweden, right, to study, I was there for a year in Stockholm in 2008. And one of the courses I took was about, I think, Swedish society, right? So I decided to go to Sweden because I thought, hey, Sweden's this very democratic, advanced place. I want to learn about renewable energy. Sweden's got a big program about that. Let's go. So I'm sitting there, and then this lecturer tells me that Sweden's actually a very unequal place. They don't have good enough equality. And she went on to describe that it was because in the Swedish parliament there were more men than women, and therefore that society wasn't equal. And I really couldn't grasp that, right? Like I always thought, hey, equality was about whether or not you could move in a society to bring your life forward in a direction that you want, right? And if there were obstacles being put in place that were systematic, then maybe that would mean this society was not so equal, and you could then, improve on that society. And I remembered asking her, I said, hey, so what happens if it's 49.8? Does that mean you're still 49.8% men or women? Is that still not equal? And I would actually be I wouldn't think twice if 80% of the parliamentarians were female or male, right? As long as they got the job done. So I think that's one difference, right, between I'm not trying to speak for everyone, but I'm just trying to share that I don't often hear these things brought up back home, but I hear them a lot here. Another comment is often about the income gap, like how much does a CEO make versus an intern at his company. So from the sounds of it, a lot of these countries won't consider themselves equal until CEOs earn the same as their interns. That's also a foreign concept for me or for us, because we're pretty happy to see people making a lot of money as long as they're adding value to society. And we're more worried about whether or not the people at the bottom have access to climb up the ladder, right? So that's one ideal that I like to talk about. The second one would be freedom. So I get told very often that I don't live in a free country because if I vandalize, if I spray paint somebody's car, I get into trouble in Singapore. So that means I'm not free. Or if I decide to throw some trash on the floor and I get a fine, that means I'm not free. I promise you, when I'm in Singapore, I don't have this massive urge to throw trash on the floor, right? I don't feel that constrained when I land in my home country, right? So to me, these strict laws are actually pretty invisible, because I don't even notice them until people in the West bring them up to me, right? So for us, or for me, I don't want to speak for anyone else, but for me, freedom, the view of freedom here is slightly different because I realized, for example, people are not so, the average friend or family I have in Europe or in Australia, they're not so worried that, for example, most of their income or disposable income is taken away via taxation, right? Like, to me, that is taking away from my freedom. Not because I choose, I want that money so that I can buy myself my 5th Ferrari, right? But it's more like I realize that the choice I have to deploy the fruits of my labor in the West is more curtailed than it is back home. And I'm not trying to say what's right or what's wrong. I'm just trying to share that I realize people here are not as worried about that, right? As probably people back home would be. When I go home and I share with my friends in Singapore the amount of tax I'm paying in Germany, they don't believe me. They outright don't believe me. They pull out their phones and they start Googling and they say, okay, how much do you earn? And you're saying you only get that much at the end of the month? Like, they actually don't believe that that much of your productive capacity is being taken away. So that's one aspect that I think we're a bit different in. Another one would be the freedom to share ideas and to talk about the society and whatever you're observing in front of you, right? No offense, but every time when we're in Singapore and somebody from the West is joining our conversation, let's say we have a social gathering and somebody comes in from America or Europe, we realize that we have to be a lot more careful with what we say, right? But it's weird because when I'm in Europe, people tell me that I don't have freedom of speech back in Singapore, right? Or even when I travel to China, where even I am told, right, that it's supposed to be very controlled, I hear people say things about society, about their government, and I'm thinking to myself, hey, don't you guys know that there's a social credit system and you guys are going to be locked up forever? Like, how come you guys are having such open conversations? And so that's one other aspect of freedom that I think is different, right? That has nothing to do with laws. It's just a form of self-censorship. Like, we feel like we need to be respectful of the other people around us, and we have to be compassionate, and we don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. So we end up being a lot more careful in our speech. So I just wanted to share for freedom. I think we have slightly different concepts there, right? The third thing I'd like to talk about is the idea of democracy. So I also get told that I don't live in a democracy because the same party has been in power since the beginning. And I always think to myself, hey, but every 5 years I get to go and vote, and I get to go and let this government know whether or not I approve of them, right? And if they do a bad enough job, they won't be in power anymore. So to me, that is a democracy that's democratic enough, right? But I realize that for many people around the world, that's not democratic enough. I just want to point out that when I was in Sweden, I realized that the Social Democratic Party has been in power for, I think 72 years out of the last 94. But I never ever hear about Sweden being an authoritarian state, right? I also hear that in Singapore we're not democratic because the current leader is the son of a former leader. And then I come to Canada and I'm just wondering why doesn't anyone say Canada's a dictatorship, right? Like, but Singapore is. Not my words, yeah. I'm just saying. So yeah, I just wanted to share that for us, democracy is more like, okay, is the first thing is the people in charge, are they representing us? Do we believe that they're on a whole helping our lives get better? Are they fighting for, our interests? And it's okay if they benefit as well, right? As long as we all benefit together. And for us, it's not that important how many different parties there are and how often the governments change hands, right? It's really more about, is the job getting done? So, was that 3? Okay, fourth one, it's not really an ideal. I just wanted to talk about capitalism. Okay, let me share a secret with you guys, right? I left Singapore when I was 20 to go study in Australia. That was the first time ever that I heard people discuss capitalism. Like, I didn't even know it was a thing, right? People started to tell me, oh, capitalism, oh, they're poor people because the capitalists are, holding them down, etc. And I had to say it was very new for me because back home in Singapore, we don't even talk about capitalism because it's just a natural law, right? It's just the way prosperity gets generated. I don't go around talking about whether gravity is good or not, whether it's fair, whether we should have it, right? Capitalism just is. And what you do with the access that you generate with capitalism, that's something else, right? That's something that we can then discuss. But I realized when I'm in Europe, or in, not so much in Australia, but definitely in Western Europe, capitalism's a dirty word, right? And that was really shocking for me. So I just want to say, if you guys find yourselves in Singapore and you want to talk about capitalism, first define what that means to them so that they can then have a conversation, because we rarely ever talk about it. It's not something to be discussed, right? So I think those are the 4 main things I wanted to bring up, and I hope that maybe it's pulled the curtain a little bit to show you how maybe we have different views on these concepts. And so if there are conversations to be had about things like important topics like liberty and freedom, that maybe we make sure that we're talking about the same thing before we really dive into the details. All right, thank you.
Any questions?
Yeah, so her response was quite funny. She rolled her eyes and she said, oh yeah, that will never happen. So, I don't know. Yeah, but it just seemed like she was basically unhappy about a situation, but there was no defining what a winning situation would be, right? There was no defining what the end goal should be, Yeah.
I really enjoyed your presentation.
Thank you. I'm glad.
Do you have that in summary on a website or where I could get it and send to friends?
It will be on YouTube.
It will be on YouTube.
Everything always goes.
I would recommend we send that to everyone because I'm shocked at my own inadequacy. I thank you for clearing that up.
Wow, thank you. I'm glad I could help.
Well, I tell you one thing. I lived in Singapore for a couple of years early last decade. It is by far the best run country on the planet.
Democracy is about results.
People have a lot more freedom. It's not a perfect country. There's no perfect country on the planet. But Singapore does provide you a massive amount of freedom. And I think generally what people miss out on is that East Asian countries offer a massive amount of freedom to women, because there's a whole infrastructure to provide safety to women, including in China. women go out late in the night and they don't worry about getting into trouble with anything.
Just something anecdotal. I think the political party in Singapore is very, actually all the political parties in Singapore, they're very high on pragmatism, right? So it's not so much about what's right or wrong, but it's more about what works. And I notice when I'm overseas and I see election campaigns being held in the West, it's often there's a platform to say what the political party will do, what change they're going to enact, right? But in Singapore, oftentimes the political parties talk about what they've done. So what have they done in the last 5 years? They'll say, hey, look, I managed to do X, Y, Z. I think I did it pretty well. What do you guys think? If you give me more time, I'll be able to do A, B, C, right? But they always run on what they've done rather than not as much as what they're going to do, right? Yeah.
Just a question for you, and it's kind of it's very controversial. I believe Singapore is the first country in Asia to legalize gay marriage, which happened last year, and it was very contentious. What's your take, being from there, as to how that's going to affect society in the long term? Whereas we've seen in China, for instance, they just kicked out all of the gay rights organizations. What's your take on that?
I haven't followed it super closely, right? But I don't think they've legalized gay marriage. It used to be that homosexuality was officially a crime, right? And I think they've decriminalized it.
That happened in 2007, and then last year they legalized it.
Really, they legalized marriage? Yeah. Okay, then sorry, I'll have to check. Maybe I've been in Germany too long. Okay. But yeah, Achtung. Yeah, maybe if I'm back next year, I can tell you what I think. Yeah.
I'm just curious about your life in Germany, and if you see yourself staying there with the trajectory that it's taking, and give us understanding of your life in Germany and how you see it right now and your future there.
Okay, so yeah, Jayan mentioned my wife is German and we have 2 young kids. So at the moment, really the absolute level of lifestyle you can achieve in Western Europe is really, really high. Like we have a very, very good life, and I'm really grateful for that. So at the moment, it's more of a decision based upon what's best for the kids, what's best for my partner. The kids can be closer to their grandparents. Grandparents don't speak English, so getting them to Singapore is not the easiest, right? But for now, it's good. One big concern I had was after moving back to Germany this time, the number of people that asked me, why did you move? Like Germans that asked me, hey, if you're from Singapore, why did you move to Germany? Was very concerning, right? Because it gave me this impression that they didn't have a bright view of where things were going in their country. So yeah, for now, all I can say is life's good, but we're open to moving if things change. Yeah.
Hi. I also really enjoyed your presentation.
Thank you.
But I have a question about the East Asian disease, which is very low birth rates. It looks like Singapore has not really developed escape velocity from that. So I'd really ask you a kind of open-ended question, which is, why is that? Do you have a theory about low East Asian birth rates? Do you see that as undesirable? Comment on, I think 1.1 child per woman is where Singapore is at right now.
Yeah, I don't know if there's, I would say it's not alarm bells ringing in the streets, right? Nobody's really saying, oh no, we're gonna disappear. But what I can say is I think for the Chinese population, there's a Chinese dialect word called "gia su," which means like scared to lose. And when it comes to kids, we believe like, hey, don't have kids unless you can guarantee that they're going to have everything they need. And in Singapore, everything they need means ballet classes, horse riding, three different private math teachers at the age of 4, right? It was a shock for my German wife, right, when she came over and we had kids and there were neighbors having kids and our kids were playing in the playgrounds and their kids were learning a third language or learning, And so I think that's the reason why they're saying like maybe one child is enough, because then we can give everything we have to that one child. However, again, anecdotally, I think there might be shifts coming because we're getting to that stage where people start to realize that, hey, I didn't get straight A's at school, I didn't go to the best universities, but I'm still doing all right. So maybe my kids don't need to speak 5 languages. Maybe they can play at the playground, and it's cheaper to play at the playground, right? So I don't know. Let's see how it goes. Yeah.
Quick question then
Yes.
to follow on that. What is the immigration policy in Singapore?
Oh, it's really, really strict. So everybody can, like, I wouldn't say everybody, but it's easy to go there to work. It's not easy to go there to live, like to stay. So usually when your employment ends, you have, I don't know, is it 30 or 60 days to leave the country, right? So they're very open to economic migrants, but if you want to end up living there and staying there and becoming a citizen, you actually have to prove to the government that you're really well integrated, you're here for the long term, you're doing activities in the community, you're not just living in some expat enclave somewhere. I'll just give you one example. My wife has 2 Singaporean sons and she didn't get residency.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is there such a thing, say, as a citizenship test, or where every Singaporean has a very good idea of their responsibilities and rights as a citizen?
One very basic one, right, is the moment you become Singaporean, a big thing that when my first son was born, I went to get his birth certificate from the government agency, and they gave me the birth certificate. They smiled, they say congratulations, and here's another certificate on a letter, and it says, Ministry of Defense, your son will have to serve in the military for 2 years when he turns 18, right? So I get that 2 days after he's born. So if you're wanting to become a citizen there, you have to be sure that you're okay with you or your kids serving in the military. If no ifs, you have to. So skin in the game, right? And it filters the people that really want to be there very, very quickly. Yeah. Yes.
If, for example, his wife had received citizenship, has she then been required to serve in the military?
No, only males are required to serve. Yeah.
Right, okay. Jason, thank you very much.
Thanks. Thank you.